Hello, Visitor Center. How's it going today?
Good. I think we're doing good. We have a small audience today.
Well, it's nice to be connected to you all in the Visitor Center. Ranger Bethany, glad to hear that you're having a swell day today. This is a pretty special chance for us to connect together today. Because even though you're on the Visitor Center on the mainland, 12 miles away from me right now, and I'm underwater in the kelp forests of Anacapa Island, we are still connected together through this program called Channel Islands Live, where we're able to broadcast live and interactive from underwater with our audience members on the mainland who may have never been inside of a kelp forest themselves. And we can do this because we're not only connected to each other through technology, but we're also connected to other agencies who help support this work. So we've got volunteer divers as well as staff members from NOAA, Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary, here with us, helping to make this broadcast possible. And because of Diver Claire and other members of the team, I'm able to talk to you today. You're able to talk to me. And I wonder, Ranger Bethany, we could test that connection and give a big thank you to volunteer Matt behind the camera today on the count of 3. Are we ready for that?
Yeah, we're ready. All right, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
Hey, Matt.
Awesome. Matt is jumping for joy behind the camera right now. And we're connected together through this audiovisual program called Channel Islands Live. But we're also connected to the marine ecosystems all around us, whether or not we're actually broadcasting from them. Because right now, I'm in a pretty special marine environment called a kelp forest. Kelp are giant algae that grow underwater. Some canopy-forming species create these forests, the ones that are surrounding us on a beautiful conditioned day like today. And kelp, much like forests on land, photosynthesize, similarly to the plants you might find in the forest along the mainland. They produce the oxygen in the air that we breathe. Up to half of the oxygen in every breath that we take comes from kelp and other algae that photosynthesize in the ocean. Ranger Bethany, I wonder if we can embrace that connection too and take a deep breath together and say thank you for the help, kelp.
All right, we are ready, and we're going to say thank you for the help, Kelp. All right, everyone, deep breath in. And thank you for the help, Kelp.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm certainly thankful to have kelp in my life too. We're connected to the kelp because it produces some of the oxygen that we breathe, help reduce erosion along coastal shorelines, mitigate the impacts of climate change, but it also harbors a brilliant array of diverse species of organisms that live in the structure that it provides. And even though we're in a world underwater, I think we can kind of imagine together how some of these animals depend on the kelp. So when you think of a forest on land, Ranger Bethany, I wonder what kind of animals do our audience think of living in that forest?
Yeah, we have an answer here, and the answer is?
Trees?
Yeah, trees are one of the foundational species that you'll find in a forest on land. Trees have, in many cases, really hard wooden trunks, unlike the bendable, flexible stipes that we have in these marine environments with kelp. Kelp has all of these blades, which are like leaves that you'll find on trees on land. So they're pretty similar, but adapted to this underwater environment. What kind of animals can we imagine that we might see if we go for a walk in the woods in a forest of trees on land?
Sorry, Ranger Ruvain, we kind of cut out there. Are you asking what kind of animals live in the forest?
Yeah, I wonder if we can imagine ourselves taking a stroll through a forest on land What's an animal that we might encounter?
Bears.
All right, the answer is
Bears.
bears.
Bears, yeah. I used to work at Glacier National Park, and I would see a bear almost every day back in those days. Bears are predators as well as scavengers. They have a role in a forest on land, similar to one of the species we're going to talk about later in the program. What else? What other species might we find in a forest on land?
Yeah, we have another answer here, and the answer is
Birds.
Could you repeat that one, Ranger Bethany?
birds.
Birds, yeah. There's lots of birds that we can find living in the forest. Some of them like to eat insects, predators. Some of them are actually berry eaters. They're eating lots of the vegetation around them. And we can see some similar species underwater in the kelp forest too. As Claire brings us over a couple of animals. So right here in my hands, we have an animal that's very similar in its role in our underwater forest to some other animals we might find in a forest on land. These are urchins. These spiky little balls here are echinoderms in a group of animals known for its spiky skin, as its Latin name would suggest. We have a red urchin on my right and a purple urchin on my left. And urchins are grazers, like some species of birds, and also like deer or elk that you might find on land. They will nibble on the kelp, spend some time hiding in the rocks from predators, and come out and snack on the forest around them. For urchins, they're connected to the kelp. It provides them both a home as well as their food. It's kind of like if you lived in a gingerbread house and got to eat your walls for dinner. That's kind of the experience of being an urchin down here. And they're well adapted to living in a marine environment. You can see, actually, it grabbed a hold of my dive glove here with its Aristotle's lantern, or little mouth part structure underneath these urchins. In a healthy kelp forest, purple urchins and red urchins are eaten by predators. And so their population doesn't grow too large. Here at Anacapa Landing Cove, we have a healthy number of urchins contributing to their role in the ecosystem as the grazers, much like the deer or the elk that we'll find on land. But there are many species tied to the kelp forest. Kelp is home to over 1,000 different species of marine organisms. And diver Matt is going to take us to one of our next species. We're going to go on a little adventure together underwater. He's going to lead us there, and I'm going to follow him. We're going to meet a new species of underwater grazer. While we're on our way, does anybody have any questions about the urchins that we saw earlier?
We don't have any questions at the moment, but they are seeing the sheephead fish.
They're beating me to it. I was facing the other way. Yeah, that was a great shot we had of an adult male sheephead swimming through the picture. Somebody mentioned bears earlier that you might see in a forest on land. Well, sheephead are kind of like the bears of the ocean. Bears are partially carnivorous. They partially eat meat in addition to berries and lots of other foods. Sheephead like to munch on prey too. They eat those urchins and other species of invertebrates in the kelp forest and keep balance in our kelp forest ecosystems.
We have a question about urchins.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
The question is,
Are there any urchin species that are not in balance with the kelp forest, like the purple and the red urchins?
That's a good question. So urchins, like we saw earlier, in a healthy kelp forest ecosystem, have predators, like the sheephead, that keep them in check. And so some species in a healthy kelp forest like here at Anacapalandico, like purple urchins, are in balance. But in other places where we're missing those predators that eat and scare the urchins can proliferate, and too many of them can grow and munch through all of the kelp. So across parts of Northern California, we've lost 97% of our kelp forests in the last decade, in large part because we're missing some of those keystone predators that eat purple urchins and other species. Here in Anacapalandico, we're inside of a marine reserve. It's an area that has been for decades protected from fishing. So our sheephead, our lobster can grow big and abundant and help keep the ecosystem in balance, which creates great habitat for the next species of animal we're going to look at. Right now, I'm kind of side by side with a celebrity here in California. One of the most iconic species of snail that we'll find underwater is the abalone. Abalone are pretty cryptic. They're hard to see unless you're looking for them. So right here in my hand, I've got an abalone shell of a smaller juvenile ab. And you can see that almost circular outline of its shell. We're going to follow that here on this rock. You can see the abalone that's next to me. This abalone on my right is a pink abalone. And it's been living in Channel Islands National Park for decades. Abalone are snails that use their giant feet to affix themselves to the rocky reefs of the kelp forest. They're connected to the kelp, because they'll also graze on that drift kelp that passes by. So when we have predators like that sheephead we saw earlier and lobster, to keep the kelp forest healthy, the abalone thrive too. So do other species of gastropods or snails and slugs that we'll find here, like those that you can see on the underside of this abalone shell. I've got a couple of my favorite organisms in the ocean today for you on camera. These are nudibranchs, or sea slugs. This particular species is called a Spanish shawl. They look a little bit like Guy Fieri to me. They've got these orange frosted tips that run along their back called serrata, which helps them store some of the toxins from the animals they eat. Nudibranchs, even though they're tiny, these guys are predators. They eat hydroids and sponges and other animals found in the kelp forest. And they depend on the kelp forest and other marine ecosystems to be able to find that food and that shelter. They've also got the very tips of their heads. See what look like two really long ears or antennae poking out. Those are called rhinophores, which are their sensory organs. Helps them perceive the environment around them. Ranger Bethany, do we have any questions from our audience? What are they curious about? Either this bit of break in my hand or its shelled friend on the right here, the abalone.
Yeah, we have a question, Ranger Ruvain, and the question is,
So this, what you're showing is a sea slug as part of an abalone?
So in my left hand here, on this shell of an abalone, we have a couple of sea slugs that have been crawling around on the shell. So this was the juvenile abalone that died here in the ocean and left behind its shell, which became part of the ecosystem around it. We've got some sea slugs crawling on the shell of this former pink abalone here. Sometimes we'll even find them crawling on the external shell some of the live abalone have in the cove. And we mentioned when we saw the sheephead, having predators in our marine ecosystems to keep the ecosystem in balance is really important. It helps us keep connected to the kelp forest and the world around us. Well, one of the species, hello there, that calls the kelp forest home, that serves that role of the predator, is the spiny lobster. Here in Channel Islands National Park, we have California spiny lobster. We might be used to East Coast lobster that have big giant claws. Spiny lobster don't really have claws. Now, that's the world around them with their big antenna. They like to hide during the day and come out at night. It might look like I'm holding a pretty big lobster here, but I'm actually only holding the molt, or the exoskeleton of a lobster that it shed when it got into a bigger one. Because Anacapa Landing Cove is a marine reserve and is protected from take, lobsters like this one are able to get really big and keep growing and molt year after year. And bigger lobsters are able to eat bigger and more urchins. So by protecting this area and monitoring our kelp forests, we're able to ensure that the kelp remains healthy and species like the lobster can thrive. In that way, the kelp isn't just connected to us by producing the air that we breathe, but we're also connected to the kelp forest. Our actions and how we protect species like lobster and establish reserves and monitor the world around us makes an impact. Ranger Bethany, what is our audience thinking when we see a lobster like this? Do we have any questions or thoughts? What feelings does this bring to mind? Seeing this giant former shell?
Yeah, we have a question here. And the question is,
How big is that lobster?
That is a good question. This lobster was pretty big. You can see the size of my hand, probably about 10 inches from tip to tip. Doesn't even cover the full part of the carapace or the external shell of this lobster. So this lobster was a couple feet long. It's one of the larger ones that you might see here in Landing Cove. And because it's larger, it's able to eat larger urchins that call this area home. So by protecting the kelp forest and species like lobster, we help keep this ecosystem in balance. And we're doing our part to help the kelp today. But establishing marine reserves and monitoring these ecosystems isn't the only way that we can help the kelp. There's lots of other ways that we can contribute to safeguarding our marine ecosystems too. Ranger Bethany, does our audience have any ideas for other ways that we can help the kelp or help our ocean?
yeah, we have an idea here.
Don't pollute it. Don't pollute it.
Don't pollute it is a great one. Here
Don't
in
pollute
Anacapa
it.
Landing Cove, we find a lot of marine debris or pieces of trash that come from the mainland that wash into our oceans. This has been everything from dive masts that got left behind underwater to giant slabs of metal. We even found a cell phone here in Landing Cove one time. And so by making sure we're disposing of our trash properly and also recycling and reusing items that we have, as well as reducing the number of single-use plastics and other materials that we buy, we can do our part to help keep the oceans clean from pollution. What else, Ranger Bethany? Do we have any other thoughts from our audience or any questions in general about the kelp forest, underwater world all around us?
Yeah, we have a idea or a question here.
Yes. How many different types of fish have you found or discovered, and what are their names?
That's a really good question. There are many, many fish found in the kelp forest. A few of them have swam by me during this presentation. One of the species of fish that's really important is that sheephead that we saw earlier. But there are thin, golden-colored fish that live amongst the kelp forest that eat algae, called senoritas. There's bright orange fish, like the Garibaldi, which is the state fish of California. State marine fish, I should say. Not trying to throw shade at the California golden trout. There's fish called blacksmith, really large animals like giant sea bass, as well as species of sharks. So there's many, many species of fish that we'll find here, some of which decide to visit us on this program, some of which are staying clear.
Ranger Vivian, we have a question from the landing dock here. How old do you think that lobster was?
This lobster was probably quite old. I only have half of the exoskeleton here, so it's hard to say for sure. But this lobster spent quite a few years living in Landing Cove and in this shell before it got rid of this one and grew into a larger one.
We have a
Ranger
question
Bethany?
here, Ranger Ruvain.
How's the fishing industry being or affecting the kelp and animals around it?
That's another good question. So, fishing in Channel Islands National Park is still allowed in the majority of our waters. There's all kinds of recreational fishing, so people going out and fishing for fun, commercial fishing, people who do it for their jobs. And in Channel Islands National Park, we're a model that other places look to. How some areas can be set aside as marine reserves and marine protected areas, while others remain open for fishing. So overfishing historically has impacted the Channel Islands quite negatively. Species like abalone or giant sea bass were fished, in some cases to the brink of extinction. But by managing our marine ecosystems and setting aside places like the one we're in now, we're able to increase the number of fish and other species living all around the islands, including outside of the reserves, because they're sourced and they swim out of areas like this into other places. Ranger Bethany, we appreciate you and the mainland folks for taking the time to talk with us today and explore how we're connected to the kelp around us. From every breath that we take to the fish that we eat, to those of us who go diving in the kelp, we're all connected. These magical underwater forests, especially on a day with visibility like today. Do we have any last thoughts or questions for our visitor center before we sign off from underwater?
Yeah, we have one more.
Are there any corals in the area that are part of the ecosystem?
Yeah, there's a few different species of corals that can be found at the Channel Islands. When we often think about corals, we're often picturing the Great Barrier Reef, or these huge reef structures made of hard corals. There are actually hard corals in Channel Islands National Park too. We've got hydrocorals that live in areas like Gull Island and other locations around Channel Islands National Park. They tend to be a little bit deeper. But there's also soft corals that we'll see around the islands here. Gorgonians, sea fans. So they're a part of the ecosystem here too. They're not quite the foundational species like they are in places like Australia or coral reef environments. But we have our own corals here too.
Thank you, Ranger Ruvain. I don't think we have any other questions from the visitor center.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us today. It's been lovely talking with you, exploring this ocean ecosystem with you together. I wish you all best fishes.
Thank you for the swell program.